Unsurprisingly, to do a backwards walk the dog, you want to start with your front foot basically in the same position for a regular walk the dog. However, your back foot is going to start on the tail and it's not going to step to the nose this time. And there's another adjustment you need to bear in mind to make this work smoothly. The biggest change that I've noticed for this trick is that I'm not just up on my tiptoes to go backwards. I actually want to come slightly further back so I can raise my toes slightly. That means that when I do the trick, I'm spinning more around the ball of my foot than the toes. Basically, the contact patch has moved back slightly. What that means as well is that if you start in the same position as a regular walk the dog, when you rock back to the back part of that contact patch, all of a sudden you're in the wrong point. So you actually want to start slightly further forward than you'd think. If, like me, you've been doing regular walk the dogs for a long time before you come to this trick, then the idea of lifting your toes up for one is going to seem really wrong, like just inherently wrong. And that's because when you do a regular walk the dog, your weight is almost all on the toes. You're leaning forwards into it and just pushing constantly forwards. You're doing this with your foot, just scooting through every one of those spins. You also want to keep your weight forwards to stay over it as it rotates. Well, it seems obvious to say, but this is totally the opposite. You can't do that. For one, if you're leaning forwards as you push the ball backwards, you're going to fall over. Your weight distribution's all wrong, it's going to end badly. It's not a comfortable position. So shifting the weight backwards obviously helps you stay more centered. But the other thing is you've got to do that to create space for it. While with a regular walk the dog, you're kind of shunting forwards. On a backwards one, the board has to kind of slot under you more. So lifting the toe just slightly, taking some weight off the front of the foot, actually gives the board some space to slot in. It sounds really weird and it's not going to show up on camera, I promise, and it's not ideal. I'm not lifting my toes far enough to create a huge chasm, a huge gap between that and the grip tape. But just lifting them a tiny bit, creating that little bit of space, will reduce some of the friction as the board finishes that 180. Because when you do a regular walk the dog, your weight distribution is basically equal between the tip of the toe and the ball of the foot, it means the center of the rotation is roughly there, roughly right in the middle of your toes. So that's why you try and line that up with the center of the board. If your center of rotation is dead in the middle, then when you spin the board around, it's exactly in position to do the next one. The problem is, as we've just shown, because you want to lift your toes slightly, your center of the rotation, your center of your contact point has shifted backwards. It's actually now closer to where the ball of your foot is. Now, as a result, if I start with that in the same position as it would be for a walk the dog, but I've rocked backwards slightly to make the backwards one work, all of a sudden the center of the rotation is here. And if I spin around that, I'm no longer in the right position to do the next spin. So I've got to shift the whole foot forwards to try and get the ball of my foot where the center of rotation is. And that means it looks like I'm too far forward. That small shift is just enough to make sure that the board will end up where it began after one rotation, and it will set me up perfectly for the next movement. Up until this point, I've largely been talking about the front foot and the weight distribution and placement of that. But something else to consider is the weight distribution on the back foot. For similar reasons, you don't want to be too flat-footed as you push that round. Don't need to lift up quite as much as you do with the front foot, but I find that when I'm doing these, if my weight is more on the ball of my foot, kind of central there, then I can get a much cleaner push round with less likelihood of me snagging and getting stuck on the board as I spin. Now you understand the changes in foot placement and balance. The rest of it should be pretty simple. After all, you're just doing a walk the dog in reverse. Rather than stepping to the nose and twisting that way, you're doing it the opposite way around. You start off on the tail, you go slightly light on the front foot, not too much, and just push that back foot round. The difficulty comes in the fact that in order to get a full 180, that leg's got to come a long way. around. I was talking with Bob Lofton about this, who, for those who don't know, basically did the first version of Freestyle Tricktips back in the early 2000s. And he was talking about the fact that it's easier to under-rotate these. And that's true, because getting that foot past that point all the way around to there is actually quite uncomfortable. And it puts quite a lot of stress on this hip. But I recommend you persevere. Don't worry about trying to get a sequence of them right now. Don't worry about trying to do multiple ones. But start here and twist all the way around. Get used to that full 180. And when you've got it right, your thighs are basically going to rub together quite a lot. So, you know, I hope you're not prone to chafing. It's not a very comfortable feeling. Now, it's for this reason, for the pursuit of the full 180, that I actually recommend you do these rolling. You don't want to go too fast because, you know, you are going to fall over backwards. But trying to do these rolling in a straight line will force you to do these clean. And hopefully, by the time you are trying these, you should be comfortable enough with yourself and with your own skateboarding to insist on having them clean, on not accepting half measures. So don't go too fast, get your front foot in position, just one gentle push, and focus on doing that. Just that for now. Just one push and try and get a full 180 so you can roll away backwards cleanly, keeping your pace, keeping your speed. Once you've got used to that, build up to 2, build up to 3, see how long you can do it for. Something else to consider with backwards walk the dogs is your shoulder position. And hopefully this is a lesson you'll have already learned to a degree with the regular walk the dogs. Because of the fact you're constantly spinning this board, you want your shoulders to be perpendicular to the deck at all times. No 45 degrees, no side-on ollie stance. Literally, perfectly forward facing, as if you were setting up for a kickflip. Now, the problem with that is that that's fine when you're going forwards, but when you're going backwards, you can't see a thing. And that can be concerning, especially when you're just learning these. This isn't the sort of thing you want to do 10 or 20 of in a line at the local skate park with little street rats or scooter kids just kind of tearing around behind you. Similarly, I don't really want to do it here because although I'm quite a way away from the pillars, I know there's a fence somewhere behind me and that starts messing with my head. Seriously, as soon as I do more than one here, I'm like, how far? I don't know. I can do this trick comfortably, but if I know there's something behind me, it's going to mess me up. So if you're trying to learn these, find a big open space with no hazards, no drain covers, no grills, no random litter or rubbish on the floor. Just a big, smooth, open space, because the last thing you want to do is worry about this. You want to be able to focus on just the movement and nothing else. So I think I'm going to go off that way. If you're anything like me, you might constantly run into the same problem for the first 6,000 or so of these that you do. Namely, that after you've finished the spin, you find yourself right at one edge of the board, like that. Now, the cause of that, the reason for that happening, is twofold. First of all, if your foot isn't dead central, if it's off to one side, then you've moved the center of rotation. It's below your foot, not in the middle of the deck. So if I start here, then after that 180, oh look, I'm right at one side of the board again. You're never going to be able to do them in a flowing sequence if you keep doing that. But even if you've got your foot as central as possible, the same problem can occur because you're not controlling your weight distribution correctly. If your weight is on the outside of your foot, then the center of the rotation is off to one side. Similarly, if I've got the weight of my foot right on the ball of my foot, which tends to be my biggest problem with these, then actually I might as well be stood like that. And the center of rotation is here. If I'm like that, oh God, not only do I have no control, but again, I've moved right to the side. Try to get used to keeping your weight evenly distributed across that point of the foot. It should be right here, because then you'll be in the center of the board and the rotation will be as clean as possible. You don't see backwards walk the dogs very often, which I think is a crying shame, but I kind of understand why. We all learn regular walk the dogs and go, cool, done it, got the walk the dog, sorted. And then we go away and learn carousels and butter flips and 540 shove-its and all that sort of thing, you know, big flashy moves. But there's a lot you can get from a backwards walk the dog. It's a new movement, a new motion, a new way of balancing, and it's going to take time to learn. All footwork takes time, but when you've got it, it's a really fun thing to throw into a line between other tricks. Just something a little different, that little bit of extra flavor. Because it's footwork that brings out a freestyler's personality more than anything else. And even though this is a very old trick and other people have done it, how you do it will say more about you than any flip trick you ever learn. So, you know, get out there and give it a go.